It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Conversations with Joan. Conversations with Joan will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life's Conversations with Joan. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Conversations with Joan focuses on topics that are important to your life, from health and wellness to professional development to personal well-being. Change makers join me to share their insights, tips, and strategies so you can thrive and live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. Now, let's start talking. What if you could flip the script on the pain in your life and learn how to cultivate purpose and joy, not after grief, but during it? Tsilimparis contends that we can understand our emotions and reframe grief that opens us up rather than shuts us down. He joins us to discuss how grief and loss can empower us to build emotional resilience in a difficult world. John is a psychotherapist, mental health consultant, and podcast host. He's the author of The Magic in the Tragic and Retrain Your Anxious Brain. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, John, we all experience pain and grief to some degree. Why do you believe we fear those feelings so much?
Well, as they say, everyone is going to experience pain in their lives. It doesn't matter who you are, how rich you are, how happy you are, how good looking you are, how good in shape you are. And because pain is such a big part of being human, we understand that there are, that pain doesn't have to be the only definition that we draw or we interpret from difficult times. Sometimes there's poignancy to tragedy. And so that cultivation, that pairing of the two, the splendor, the beauty, with the sadness or with the difficult times or the adversity, history has shown that tends to inspire us. It tends to uplift us and give us euphoria in that sense. So you're building emotional resilience by finding the aesthetic in your pain, finding the beauty in the suffering, and thus in that process, as you dignify it, you actually reduce your suffering as well.
Well, people don't like to feel these emotions. That's why I started out with that question, because we ignore them or we deny them or whatever we do to stuff them down. But what happens when grief is not dealt with? What happens to us physically, emotionally, spiritually?
Well, exposure to unprocessed grief or unspoken grief is, it could be perilous to your central nervous system. The event that occurred, the trauma or the person that you are missing or have lost, the memory of that person might stay with you longer than you would like. And also it could stay with you in a way that could be detrimental to you because it will feel unresolved. It will not be converted into either appreciation or a happy remembrance. So it's good to check in with it as often as possible. And, so when I work with my clients, it's a hard sell in the beginning because they don't want to go there. They don't want to talk about this stuff. So what my book does and what I do is I try to introduce them to the idea that you can go there, but in a different way. You can try a different route. You can flip the script on grief and, start to associate your pain with personal growth, with sometimes even joy, but personal growth and gratitude. It's a different paradigm shift.
When I look at my own life, when I started doing this work, it really resulted from a lot of loss in a very short period of time. My mother passed away, and this was in 5 months. My mother passed away, my sister passed away, my 23-year marriage ended, and my son left for college. And so I was able to get through that. I mean, it was a really rough period, but I was able to get through it. And I often wonder now why I was when someone else who may go through a similar situation gets stuck there. Why can one person get through that and someone else stay stuck? Is there something I knew? Because to be honest, I never thought I could. So how does that play out in these two people's lives?
It's a great question. So they don't know yet, but it's back to the nature nurture. There are some people that are born with a higher or lower threshold for distress tolerance. And it doesn't make them any better or worse. It's just the way that they're made up. Look at it phenomenologically. And yeah, some people are able to process, feel the feelings, feel the pain, go through the grief, and then kind of like get their lives back. And other people stay stagnant. And for them, the reliving or the rehashing or the reminiscing, all of that is very difficult for them. So I think that those people would need a slower process of grieving as opposed to the societal expectation that you should grieve and move on after 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. So to answer your question, I think it's a combination of variance in how we respond to stress and trauma.
So the resiliency that you mentioned earlier, it's kind of like a muscle, right? Mm-hmm. It's something that we can build.
Yes, resiliency is something that you do build. It is something that as a component of awareness as well as acceptance. The awareness that, life is going to be hitting me with challenges all the time. And instead of me moving away from it, I'm actually going to allow myself to move towards it. There's a new science out there called allostasis. And allostasis is a science that involves you, again, moving towards your grief, towards your pain, as opposed to avoiding it. We know that if we avoid it, we don't evolve, we don't become deeper people, and we will probably build resentment. So what I have people do is what's called inspiration exposure, which is a way to expose yourself to beautiful things while you're feeling that grief. And when you do that, you're transforming it into something different.
Back then, one of the biggest lessons that I learned early on was that I could make the choice to heal, that I could decide to do something differently. And to be honest, back then, I had no idea what those different things would be. But I just knew that I couldn't stay where I was any longer because it was just too painful. You get to that fork in the road where you can go one way and stay in this really dark place, or you can go in a different direction and choose to heal. And I've come to believe that it is a choice. You don't have to know how to do it. You just have to say, I can't do this anymore. Would you agree that that's the first step? It's making that decision that I'm going to do something differently.
Yes, that's exactly right. So the sort of inflection point is making the decision, and hopefully people do it with family and friends or a therapist because it's hard to do alone. But this is not going to take me down. This is part of life. I accept it. It's a contract that we make with life when we are born. And that, sometimes the obstacle is the way, as they say. It's not an obstacle that needs to destroy your life. As long as you don't put a time frame on it and you are patient with it and you give yourself the love and compassion that you might have given somebody else who is grieving. So, yeah, I like the way you put it. It is kind of a choice that one has to make, not for expediency, but to at least take it in a different direction and to be open-minded about how it might be different. It may not be so bad if I open up to it. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe I'll grow from it. Maybe I'll evolve from it.
And each time you see the beauty in something, or I like to say, kind of let yourself off the hook for this pain that you're sitting with, every time you move away from that, even if it's for a minute or two, you do build that resiliency muscle that you spoke about. And, I just think that it's doing something different and just doing it, like you said, without any expectations or outcome. But the more that you do it, the easier it becomes.
That's right. So the only relief from the grief, as they say, is in the grieving. So one must grieve, and grieving is not, shutting yourself out in your bedroom and not talking to anybody and not connecting. That's not grieving. That's isolating. So you want to create the intention to hold your grief in high regard and think about, the ancients and all of the poets and all the writers and everyone that's written about grief for years and see what they have to say about it. They've all been through the pain too, and they found ways to make it beautiful. They have found ways to do that. So I call that constructive aching, that you allow yourself to ache and hurt, but you're being constructive. I also call it positive wounding, where you can look back a week later and say, you know what? I'm wounded in a positive way because this is making me a deeper person. It's making me grow. Also, the ancient Greeks, incidentally, they had a very strong attraction to the nobility of suffering. To them, if the nobility of suffering was a kind of place that you would reach to where you would develop pride for having suffered. In other words, you were initiated into sort of a higher echelon, higher self club because you did suffer. There was nobility in that. That's kind of fascinating.
If someone has a friend or a loved one that they see that that person is in complete self-denial, that person does not want to deal with anything. And you know, like I said, they're stuffing these emotions. They're saying, I'm fine. They're walking around with that plastered smile. How do you get that person or encourage that person to want to make that shift, to see the grief more in a more positive light, to reframe the way that you're viewing the situation that you're in?
Well, the people that come to me are typically ready to grieve, and that's why they come to a therapist, because they want to go through the process. But yes, there are many people that are afraid to reach out or don't know how to. And I would just work very, very carefully and very slowly, respecting their process to come forward whenever they can. I might hint in very, very subtle and kind ways that I'm here for them if they really want to talk about it, or if they're having a sad moment, or if they're struggling with the day. But it's very, very difficult and sometimes ill-advised to expect somebody to just start talking about it when they're not ready. Sometimes the wound is a little too deep and they need a little bit of time.
And I know in my own life, you know, it's 15 years out now from when I went through all of that pain and loss. And you're never really over it. You kind of learn to live with it. It's there. But sometimes you can just be walking through a supermarket and see a box of cereal on the shelf and start to cry. So it's probably, an important thing to remember that it's not like a switch that you flip and it's done. It's always there, but you just learn to navigate it better. And what would you say to that point?
Very true. So grieving is not a destination. It's a process. For some people, it could be weeks. Some people, it could be months. It could be years. But when someone dies or you've been through a very bad hardship, you've lost your livelihood, etc., it's always going to be there. So if you understand that it'll always be there, but over the years in gradations that will start to recede a little bit, then paradoxically, you're going to have a better day. But if you are resistant of it and you think that every time you do see that thing that reminds you of your pain, you think something's wrong, it's going to make your grieving process much harder. So you do have to accept that it's not about getting over it, it's about living with it. But as the days go by, you learn to live with it in a different way.
In what ways have you seen people use their grief for something good?
Well, first of all, it elevates compassion for other people. It makes them understand others better, so it connects people. It sort of brings you into the club, so to speak, the community of sufferability, because everyone suffers. It deepens your understanding of what it takes to be alive. It makes you think about the important things in your life, and maybe makes you seek out spirituality or religion. It makes you seek more. It helps you to look for higher understanding about things because you're so wounded. And I think it makes you respect life a little better too. Perhaps it makes you live your life more meaningfully, more purposefully. So there's a lot of benefits that you can get from grief.
John, for someone who is in the early stages of loss, what would you say to that person to help them understand that empowerment is even possible, and how can they begin the process?
Well, dialogue is the way to start, and to not isolate and to reach out to support. Now, there's many books out there on how to grieve. You write, sympathy letters to yourself. There are exercises that you can do. There are grief groups you can go to. But just to respect and or rely on the fact that you need to start a dialogue, not only with yourself, but probably with others, and probably with like-minded people who have gone through the same thing as you. And as in my book, I try to get people to try to use what's called inspiration exposure, which is a profound way of poeticizing, without the pessimism, our grief issues. So when you couple pain with beauty, you appropriately lionize your pain. Just imagine, Joan, if you have pain and you actually pull, you can draw elation from that pain in the same way that pain draws from that pain. It's really quite a different thing. So if I get people into that aesthetic mindset about that, then traversing through the grief process is a little bit easier. But it's a slow process. I said this is going to be a marathon. It is not going to be a sprint.
And once again, that book is The Magic in the Tragic. John, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and your work?
Well, you can go to my website, which is johnsilimparis.com. And you can also see a very extensive profile on the Amazon.com page for the book, The Magic in the Tragic. There's a whole bio below, and it says a little bit more about my other books. So, and I'm on social media as well. I'm easy to find.
And so, John, in our final moments, what is the takeaway? What would you like to leave our listeners with?
The takeaway is try not to fear your feelings, and in this case, try not to fear your grief, and then understand that there's value in addressing the grief, no matter how painful it is. And we all know that it's painful, and that's why people avoid it. It's natural. Human beings are wired to try to avoid negative things. We're just wired that way. That's how we survive. So it's to not be afraid of your fear, and to look at challenges that come forward in a different way, not be kind of like, oh, it's a good thing that it's happening. No. It's just to be curious and to use it in terms of personal growth, that if evolution gives me grief when someone dies or I go through a difficult time, it must be there for a reason, and I don't need to be afraid of it.
John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Joan. You asked great questions.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the show informative. At Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, we believe that knowledge is power. Take what you've learned, apply it, and live your best life now. Remember that the information provided is the opinion of our guest and should never replace the advice of a professional who knows your personal situation. If you'd like more information, visit our website, CYACYL.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on the site, listen to past shows on demand, read our digital articles, and be sure to subscribe to our mailing list. Until next time, this is Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.